As Susan has said, and as many of you know, we begin the fall season with the discussion of the state of the world. I'm almost frightened to do that today, because discussing the state of the world is like opening Pandora's box. All sorts of unexpected monsters leap out. That is truly the global condition today. In many decades, I've not seen such a confused international agenda. And it poses a number of questions, many of which will be answered in the next 10, 15 years. So we are entering a kind of period that you can call the age of questions. In order to look at the world today, I think it's necessary to look back a little bit. And if you do, you will see that in the past century, we have had three major conflicts about world leadership: the First World War, Second World War, and the Cold War. About 50 of the past 100 years has been taken in these conflicts. Over 100 million people have died in these conflicts. Imagine the world if we didn't have these conflicts, okay? Well, eventually we thought we had settled it with the end of the Cold War. And about 30 years ago, a new world emerged with the collapse of the Soviet Union. That world had three power groups. One was the Western Alliance, which had three components: the United States, with its immense military and economic strength at that time; Western Europe, which had been on the front line of conflict for a long time; and Japan joined as an anchor in the Asia-Pacific region. The Western Alliance were all democracies, all capitalist economies, with a high degree of social freedom, and pushed democracy in the world. They were supported by associated states like Israel, Australia, Canada, and were extraordinarily powerful at that time. The center of it was the United States. A second major power center was beginning to emerge around 1985-90, and that was China. It was just starting. It had big problems at that time. Tiananmen Square in 1989. Its importance was that it had 25% of the world's population, but it was just the opposite of the Western Alliance. It had a state-owned economy just beginning to get into capitalism, an authoritarian political system. And we all thought that it would be large and important, but maybe something like India as it developed. Nonetheless, it was a big center. And the third was a collection of non-Western countries, the most important of which may have been India or some Middle Eastern states, very mixed, not very powerful, some democratic, some authoritarian, some capitalist, some religious states, and not very clearly defined. Many of them were Islamic states. This was the architecture of world affairs for the past 30 years or so. We continued like this. There were a few disruptions and bumps along the way. 9/11, American wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which are still going on. 2008, 2010, economic crisis. North Korean nukes. But generally, this was the shape of things, and there was no major challenge to this architecture. In this landscape, which continued for some time, we didn't expect the kind of changes that were taking place underneath. And slowly, those changes have begun to emerge in the past 3 or 4 years, okay? And have reshaped each of these three groups: the Western Alliance, China, and the collection of non-Western states. The Western Alliance has become significantly less powerful, more troubled, especially in the past 2 or 3 years, when Trump has significantly reversed the Western Alliance by creating problems with our Western European allies and Japan. Inside each of the components of the Western Alliance, there is some uncertainty right now. We have turned anti-international, okay, and have got into conflicts with our closest allies. In Western Europe, Brexit is damaging both Britain and Europe. There are no winners in Brexit, weakening the whole structure, so much so that people are questioning whether the European Union will survive in the long run. And in Japan, the anchor of the Western alliance in the Asia-Pacific, there are other problems, notably the very strong, important alliance between Japan and South Korea, which is now in some difficulties as they are having problems and some stagnation is taking place. So the Western alliance is less significant than it was, although still very strong. China has had an extraordinary rise in the past few years. 15 years ago, nobody would have anticipated that China would have overtaken Western Europe, Japan, come close to the United States in its economic development. And as it gets more important, it wants more space in the world for itself. A few years ago, none of us would have anticipated that the hierarchy of the Cold War, Russia the leader and China the follower, would be reversed. And China is now the leader and Russia is now China's follower. Okay? And China has carved out a major place for itself around the world. And then the non-Western world has redefined itself. From being a few states and some oil states, the Islamic personality, the jihadist inclinations have become clarified, and we see two things. The huge Islamic world, 1.2 billion people, okay, about almost 20% of the world's population, have now begun to go beyond oil as their single item into a conflict between Shia and Sunni that is burning up many parts of the world. So, as a result of this evolution, we are seeing a number of things. The first is this. We are beginning the fourth major struggle for global leadership in the past century. As I told you, First World War, Second World War, Germany, then Cold War, Russia. And now we are facing a fully fledged non-military war with China. Non-military, but fully fledged war for economics, trade, markets, currency manipulation, extension of culture, quest for allies, global influence. And this is just beginning. This is the fourth major struggle. It is unlikely to end in a military conflict, as the others did, because the size of two nations is so big. Who can fight China? 1.5 billion people, 5 times the size of our population. Who can get into a full-fledged war with us with all our nuclear weapons? But in every other way, it is the beginning of a new, full-fledged war. That's the first feature, and that will mark global politics for at least 10, 15 years to come. The second is that the Islamic world has defined itself beyond oil. An intense struggle is taking place within the Islamic world, notably between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but essentially between Sunni and Shia groups. And their proxies are destroying the Middle East. They set up groups in different countries. 3 or 4 countries have been engaged in devastating wars, the misery of Syria. 20 million people, 12 million of them are refugees. In Yemen, unparalleled misery. In Libya and in Lebanon, these nations are being devastated by the Sunni-Shia conflict. Okay. At the same time, in the past 10 or 15 years, groups have arisen which we never noticed before. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, Taliban, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, militant organizations outside of governments, but attacking governments, attacking others, and all very well armed, who will go to any lengths to carry out their agenda. Okay. We are, somewhat unfortunately, taking sides in this Shia-Sunni conflict. In the past 2 or 3 years, we have emerged as essentially agents of Saudi Arabia. Okay. We have defended them against that killing of that man Khashoggi. We have, when Iran threatened Saudi Arabia, we say it's an act of war. It seems to be implying that's against us. For some reason or the other, and you can work out the reasons yourself, the Trump administration has taken a strong stand on behalf of Saudi Arabia. Okay? and that gets us involved there. Israel has been more prudent, watching both, although not very friendly with Iran, of course. Okay. Then the third area, other non-Western nations are beginning to assert themselves. They don't have much economic clout, but they are buying arms and manufacturing arms at an extraordinary rate. India, for example, Turkey, North Korea. Okay. And the question is how much we should get involved with them. So there is right now a very questing period, and we don't know what the outcome of this will be. My own feeling is that it will take 10 or 15 years before we can see how the major trends of world affairs will flow. How the fourth major conflict between the United States and China will evolve. And my own guess is it will not end in war, but it will end in one moving further ahead than the other declining, and adjustments being made in world affairs to accommodate that. Whether it will end with one United States or China being dominant, or they'll work out some agreement with each other, we don't know. But this is the central theme of world affairs and will be for the next 10, 15 years. As these struggles are taking place, there is in the democratic world a political virus that has begun to infect democracies recently. It is called populism. It's essentially anti-democratic, very divisive forces which don't respect the rule of law, which denigrate everybody else in the political universe, who engage in routine gerrymandering and voter suppression, who don't respect the verdict of the courts, okay, and go to extremes to press their agenda. You see this developing in Europe. Hungary and Poland, two fairly recent democratic states, have now come under the influence of these populist forces, which are changing their democracy into a kind of a quasi-autocracy. In Germany, for many years, there was something called Alt-Deutschland, alternate for Germany, a neo-fascist group, 0.5% of the vote. They're now getting 20% of the vote. In Britain, a good part of the Brexit hostility is being created by forces like this, who say that Britain is too much under the influence of foreigners and it's a society that's losing its British character. In Italy, this is rising. In the Middle East, you see it in Turkey, in Latin America, in Brazil. Okay. Groups who are using democracy to get power and then flout democracy. Okay. They have certain features. They often combine with some form of religion to promote their agenda. We are religious, right? We are religious first. Okay? And the danger is this: when you function in politics in the name of religion, you will never admit that you make a mistake. You're on the side of God, you must be right in everything. Okay. Second, they pick on the weakest segments of society and attack them. Minorities, refugees, often with anti-Semitic overtones. Okay. And they are mobilizing themselves, and the counter to them, the authentic Democrats, are not responding very well. Normally, we can say that we are inoculated against these groups by high voter turnout, which is not taking place so far, and by very good leadership. That is what defeated some of these forces in the past. But now, in every major nation of the world, leaders are in significant trouble. And that is another feature of our time. The coming tension in leadership. Okay? Of all the populist forces, I don't need to define the forces that are now affecting American politics. Okay? But look at all the major states. Something is happening. After 20 years of extremely secure authoritarian rule, Putin is showing the first signs of trouble in Russia. Groups are rising that are protesting. Okay. Recently, there was a municipal election in Russia, normally not very important. You know the result before the election takes place. This time, big crowds gathered. Although the election was somewhat fixed, as Russian elections are, still Putin's forces suffered some setback, and this may well be the emergence of something challenging Putin for the first time. A counter to Putin, a man called Alexei Navalny, has emerged. He's put in prison, comes out, put in prison again, comes out. Okay, and something is happening which suggests that Putin is going to have a more difficult time in the next few years than he's had before. It may be that 20 years run his course. He will try to control this by force, one way or the other. But the security that he had as leader of Russia seems to be cracking. In China, you've seen something quite extraordinary take place. This past week, China had a big 70th birthday party. Enormous parades, celebrations, okay, demonstration of the progress they have made. All sorts of events took place, but there was rain on the parade. The rain was Hong Kong. A small island area. Hong Kong in total is about 1/3 the size of Long Island. 7 million people have disturbed the mainland of China. 1.4 billion people. And the Chinese are in a big dilemma about this. See, protest has gone on. The Chinese took over Hong Kong from the British in 1997, promising to have two different forms of society, continue the British style in Hong Kong. Mainland will be different. People of Hong Kong have many freedoms that the mainland doesn't have. They have their own passports, their own money, and come and go as they want. Okay? But slowly, as all authoritarian states do, China has been chipping away at this. And finally, about 5 months ago, they wanted to introduce some new regulations about the judiciary and China's ability to try people whom they didn't like in China, not in Hong Kong. And a protest broke forth. 1.5 million people on the streets in Hong Kong, mostly young people. It has gone on for 4 months now. Hong Kong has been brought to a halt. The most dazzling commercial city in Asia Pacific, which has been a gateway for the flow of funds to China, is now had a stroke. I was in Hong Kong a month ago. Paralysis. You can't get to the airport. They say the airport is open, but surrounded by thousands of people trying to prevent you from getting there. It's the busiest, one of the busiest airports in the world. 1,500 flights take place in and out of Hong Kong every day. To connect anywhere else, you go through Hong Kong, go to Korea, go to other places. That has all been in confusion. The great aircraft carrier of Hong Kong was Cathay Pacific. It's come to almost a halt. Okay, so the future of Hong Kong. Now, the Chinese have one or two options. One is let it go on in the hope that it will burn out. But as it goes on, it's getting worse. They're trying to control it with tear gas, with water cannons, not very effective. The big protest in Hong Kong was on the Chinese celebration of the 70th birthday in order to make a point and spoil the Chinese celebration. Now, that's one thing, they can allow it to go on. Will it burn out? No. Second, they can make some concessions. But they're very slow in making concessions because that means it shows the sign of their weakness. And the third is to crack down like Tiananmen Square. Send in the troops and shoot. That is the last alternative that they would want to take because it will be slaughter. Okay? Most of these protests have been peaceful, but now they are beginning to turn violent. Okay? And the question for the Chinese government, which essentially controls Hong Kong, is this. How long can this go on without it infecting the mainland? On the mainland, there are small groups who don't quite cherish Chinese governance, Tibetans, Uyghurs and all that. Will this infect them? The Chinese government is working up nationalism on the mainland. They've moved a lot of troops to the border of Hong Kong. And we don't know what will happen in the next few weeks. Okay? But it could be a major disruption for China. Okay? In Israel too, you see at the present time, disruptions taking place. The era of Netanyahu is slowly drawing to a close. Right now, even during these holy holidays, they are proceeding with the hearings of the indictment of Netanyahu. Twice this year, he has tried to have elections to be able to renew his mandate, and he has been unable to renew his mandate. He's trying to form a government again, but hasn't succeeded. Okay? Sooner or later, the Bibi Netanyahu era will come to an end. Even if he manages to continue, he'll be a very, very weakened leader. And the big question will come with his indictment and the trial and so on. So he's a kind of caretaker prime minister at the moment. He might have to go anytime, and that's an era of uncertainty. On the Palestinian side, their leader is in the departure lounge. Is a man called Abbas, who will succeed him, we don't know. And most of all in the major states, the United States, we have a 2020 election coming with all sorts of uncertainties. Okay? We don't know whether Trump will last, if he lasts, how he will behave, what the outcome will be, who will be the main challenger. Okay? And we are in a period of great uncertainty, with total distraction from the issues in society as we focus on the impeachment proceedings and things around it. Even in a country like India, which has been relatively peaceful, a period of trouble is starting with some problems over a small area in the north called Kashmir. So these are not very normal times, and normally they come and go. But this time, the weakness of leadership, the uncertainty, leaves an air of indefinite outcomes in the wind. It is complicated by three other unprecedented developments that are affecting world affairs. The first is a huge technological revolution that has taken place. There has been nothing on this scale since the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. The Industrial Revolution changed the whole economic face of our planet and brought in industry to replace agriculture as a principal form of employment. But industry created jobs. People moved from agriculture to industry and to services and so on. Jobs were created. Cities began to grow. Urbanization took place. Modern forms of capitalism developed. Okay? Today we are having the technological revolution that is making certain groups very rich but destroying jobs. And we are developing a paradox of very rich societies with very uncomfortable poor people. Okay? At the heart of it are three technological developments. 5G connectivity that is coming, okay? Quantum computers. The first manifestation of it was last week, when a Google-sponsored quantum computer did in 3 minutes what it would take the smartest computer in the world 1,000 years to calculate. Okay? And then artificial intelligence, which is the core of this. What is artificial intelligence? It's a man-made creation of brain power that will be superior to human brains. For the first time in history, we have kind of taken over evolution. Until now, we have created all sorts of things, and we could control them. We were superior to them. We made radio, we made television, we made cars. They were controllable by us. Now we are creating things that have a superior capacity to human beings. And in the end, who will be in charge, the inferior or the superior? Okay. We are creating capacity, a kind of consciousness without human feelings. Okay. Look at it this way. For most of history, there have been several different species on Earth. You know, our species, Homo sapiens, has been unique only in the past 50,000 years. Before that, like different breeds of dogs, there were different breeds of human beings. Neanderthals, Denisovians, Australopithecus. They kind of coexisted. Okay. didn't much mix with each other. And about 50, 60,000 years ago, the last non-Homo sapiens species disappeared. That was Neanderthal human beings. And our species, our branch of the human species, Homo sapiens, became dominant. It's one of the big mysteries why Neanderthals disappeared, but we don't know. And now, for the past 50,000 years or so, the Earth has been dominated by Homo sapiens, lived together. Okay. The old species of human beings, and that was what was the norm for most of history. Okay. Lived in separate groups, like different breeds of dogs. Poodles don't mix with foxhounds. Okay. But now only Homo sapiens is left. And this is the Earth that we occupy today is a monopoly on human life by Homo sapiens. Okay. Now, Homo sapiens created all sorts of things, reshaped the world. But now Homo sapiens is creating beings with a kind of consciousness. Don't look like us, maybe computers, maybe machines, but they interact with themselves. It's called the Internet of Things. Okay. For example, take these autonomous cars that drive themselves. We instruct them, but they're also speaking to other autonomous cars as they move along. More space, move this way, move that way. Okay. Computers that talk to each other and talk to us, but correct us for the first time and we listen. Okay. Tell us we are wrong, we listen. Are these creations going to increase? Are they going to take over? They're having a great impact on other things, on human decision-making, okay, on our ability to live with each other. Okay. What is the political impact of this? We've seen a little bit of it in the social media. How will this affect global politics in the next generation? Well, part of the answer is to have wise leadership. But is there any leadership today that is addressing these issues in the way we're talking about it today? Okay. We're all concerned about rights and wrongs, populism, anti-populism, voting rights, various things. This, to me, is the great underlying issue. And if we don't address it, how will it unfold? Okay. Take, for example, that attack on Saudi Arabia by some drones which seem to have come from Iran. Now, those drones were directed to Saudi Arabia, but they're also talking to themselves. Move this way, move that way, more space, and so on. Okay? So, this part of the technological revolution is an extraordinary thing. In its political manifestation, it is taking place in China in a different way. The Chinese leadership has given its people great economic and social freedom, but no political freedom. They have controlled the politics by the Communist Party, a group of 100 million people, 8% of the Chinese population, who are the bosses of things, manage things. Okay. They run the show. But after 30 years of that system, it seems that they are concerned about the control they have over their people. And so they have begun to adopt a new form of observation of people called the social observation process. Today they are introducing it through China. They plan to complete it by 2020. There are today 200 million cameras in public places in China. It will be another 400 million, altogether 600 million in a few years. They observe everything you do. Artificial intelligence enables them to recognize people from about 200 feet away. In fact, now they say from the way people walk, they can recognize them. You will have social credits, like your social security account here. And if you do something that government considers antisocial, points will be deducted. That is to say, first driving violation, 5 points. Second driving violation, 10 points. Third driving violation, your license will be taken. If you spit on the street, some points will be taken. If your dog messes on the street, some points will be deducted. If you litter, some points will be deducted. If you push in a queue, some points will be deducted. But there are also rewards. If you do something good, help a disabled person to cross the road, you'll get some plus points. And so you'll have this account. And the rewards and punishment is this. If you go to get a loan, if you have some bad social points, you'll have to pay higher interest. If you go to buy a ticket, railroad or airport, if you have good points, you go to the top of the queue. Okay. If your kid wants to go to school, your social account will be checked. Okay. This is a new form of instituting control. I was in China, and I spoke to people about this. I thought they would be very unhappy. I was surprised by the number of people who said, okay, it's a good thing. I thought it was propaganda, but in fact, some people do. They say, well, we are not doing anything. Doesn't matter if we are photographed. But it'll prevent people from littering on the street. It'll prevent people from doing some other things. Initially, that may be the reaction, but I don't know how it will go as time goes. It's certainly used to control people on the borderlands, like the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. Okay? Will the rest of the world begin to adopt this form of social control? So that people will be rated like you see the rating in New York restaurants, A, B, C, D. And if you are A, you'll get some privileges. If you get B, you... And who defines it? The government will define it. And this is a very new form of social control, which may be the face of technology in politics in the future. Will Western countries begin to adopt some of this? That is a big question. Okay? It is part of this huge technological revolution that is affecting society in so many ways. And the net result is, what will it do to control? And on the other side, what will it do to employment? A second major feature, of course, that is defining world affairs right now is climate change. You know that very well. And we are beginning to see the consequences of this. This is totally created by human beings. Can we control it? Of course we can. Will we control it? It's a big question. The human costs are rising. One of them that people don't quite realize is the arrival of a new form of refugees, environmental refugees. You know, we've associated refugees with political disturbances and wars and so on. But now in certain parts of the world, people cannot live where they are because of environmental conditions. They are moving. They won't stay where they are and die. In Africa, for example, parts of Central Africa are becoming uninhabitable. They're beginning to move. Where will they move? North of Africa and then try to get to Europe. Okay? We already have in the world today an extraordinary number of refugees, 80 million. Environmental refugees are likely to increase this amount. Climate change also multiplies the degree and the threat of communicable diseases. Increased rainfall, higher temperatures in some areas attract mosquitoes, ticks, fleas, and flies. Some parts of Africa are seeing invasions by these vectors and the increase of communicable diseases. Okay? So climate change has much more than the changing climate, change in weather that we notice every day. Okay? Already you've seen the impact in some states. The capital of Indonesia is Jakarta, 11 million people. They now have decided to move it because of environmental conditions. Jakarta is sinking because of the environmental conditions have affected the underlying earth. So they have to move 11 million people to some other location. Otherwise, they will sink. Okay? And being close to the ocean, ocean levels will rise and flood them. Bangkok, the capital of Thailand, 8 million people, they are considering the same thing. Okay? Will this affect us in some way? If global warming raises the level of the oceans by 3, 4, 5 inches, 80% of the world's population lives within 100 miles of the ocean waterfront. We may get having to build, we're already talking about having to build seawalls in downtown Manhattan. Your basement may become your swimming pool. You won't die, but you can't live in 2 or 3 inches of water. We may all have to move to Hoboken. It's worse than climate change. Okay? Yeah. But these are things which can be adjusted by political decisions. You've seen how this has disturbed young people, and what took place a couple of weeks ago at the United Nations, where that young Swedish girl led a big protest. But what came out of it in the end? Not very much. We have a political leadership led by the United States today, which is not taking this as seriously as it should. We have withdrawn from international environmental treaties. Okay? Now, this is not something which cannot be handled, but the question is, will we handle it? Okay? And what will be the effect on our societies? Okay? That's the second big thing. First is the technological revolution. But there's a third development which may to some degree offset these things in a way that has never taken place before. There is a fusion of civilizations taking place in the world. The impact of non-Western cultures on Western societies is having a profound transforming effect whose full outcome we haven't yet seen. For example, take technological fusion. Asian technology, which was a generation behind Western technology 10, 15 years ago, is now fully equal to United States and European technology in electronics, in digital technologies. Okay. Take personnel. We look at our great companies in Silicon Valley, lift the roof and you will find lots of Asians, Indians, Koreans, Japanese functioning there. Okay. Take our hospitals. Can you run them without non-American staff? Okay. Take finance, the huge investments that are coming back and forth. Okay. Take travel and tourism. There has never been so much travel and tourism in the world as right now. Last year, 130 million Chinese went out as tourists. Now, you can't tell me that this will not have an impact on China when they go back. Okay. 50 million Indians were tourists, you see, all over if you look around. Okay. Global revenues from tourism have increased enormously. In a certain way, connections are taking place which never took place before. You see this in fashion and design. You see this in food. Once upon a time, Chinese food was cheap takeout. Okay? It's now mainstream cuisine. But a reverse impact is taking place. In China, for example, the fastest growing food production is from American restaurants like Starbucks, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Starbucks has 4,000 restaurants in China, is opening new ones at the rate of 3 every day. Look at literature. The non-Americans who are writing in English, Salman Rushdie and others. Okay. Take education. We are cutting back on foreign student visas. Nonetheless, there are 1 million foreign students in this country. But nobody talks about the 400,000 Western students who are in China, 200,000 who are in Japan, 100,000 in South Korea. Something is taking place. Take some other thing. Today, close to 50 million Americans are engaged in yoga. A few years ago, what was yoga? Okay. Some type of interchange and fusion is taking place, and whether that will offset some of the global differences, I don't know. I see it in education, where I spend my life. Okay? The extraordinary impact of non-Americans on America and Americans on other countries. We are foolishly, in my view, cutting back on student visas. Okay? Foreign students who come here generally have very good experiences. They are the best spokesmen for America when they go back to their country. Okay? Will this create more hostility between groups, or will it create more fusion? I don't know, but it is something that we have to watch because it is something unprecedented in human history. Okay? Will they create a new type of society? Will this have a political impact? We have no idea. Okay? So there are a number of new features whose outcome is very uncertain. That is why I say this is an age of questions which we have to face for the first time. Who will be the winners and losers coming out of these situations? That is what we don't know. The winners will probably be those nations who can keep a unified society and adopt and adapt their societies to various changes that are taking place in the technological area, in the climate change area, in the cultural interchange. And that will probably take place in the next 10, 15 years. But what we don't know is what the losers will do. Will those who are left behind in society, will they revolt? Will they be passive and say, well, this is the way things are going? Or will they accept an inferior position? Or will they get hostile? Many years ago, some of you might remember, about the time 1984 was written by Orwell, a man called Huxley wrote a book called Brave New World. Brave New World looked at some of the technological changes of the future and said that the losers will be put, millions of them, on reservations which will be policed by the winners. Because if they are allowed out of the reservation, they will create some kind of revolution. Okay? We thought it was science fiction at that time, something we have to think about its consequences today. How will this affect America, which is, of course, our primary interest? There are two possibilities. One, looking at society today, many say that we could become like Rome or like Britain, a slow decline leading to secondary, tertiary position, to be replaced by some more dynamic nation. And that is always a possibility. But there is another view that America has always had a unique, remarkable recuperative capacity. At least 3 occasions: the Civil War, which would have divided this country into 2 or 3 separate nations; the Great Depression, which brought revolution to Europe but didn't bring revolution here; the 1960s, which some of us remember as being a very contentious area. We were defeated by a small Asian country with pajama-wearing rice farmers in Vietnam, riots in the street, a president, leading civil rights leader, president's brother, were assassinated. We were close to disaster. We recovered each time and got together in ways that were stronger than we would have imagined. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union was pointing to America and saying, America is in decline. It is soon self-inflicted disaster will come. In the end, it was the Soviet Union which collapsed. So that we have been able, in the past, to recover and recuperate, which very few other countries have done. Look at all the great powers in history. Where are they now? Rome, Greece, Spain, Egypt, Persian Empire. Okay. Can we do this again? Or is America getting too broken to fix? That is the big question. Once again, let me remind you that we have all the assets of all major states. We are the best equipped to face the challenges of the 21st century. You know, we have enormous financial assets, we have geographic assets, we have human talent. We still attract the best and the brightest from the world. We have a political system that should work better than it, if we get it working. Okay. We have the recipe and we have the ingredients. Can we bake the cake? Okay. Or will we decline like other states have declined? There are 2 ways in which states decline. Sometimes they go slowly, like Britain and France, which were great powers in the past but are second-class states today. Sometimes they just burst, like the Soviet Union or like the Roman Empire. If we go, we'll probably go like Britain and France, decline, be the great has been. But not necessarily so if we can go through the process that we have gone through before. This is why I believe that the next few election cycles in this country, beginning with the year 2020, are very important for the destiny of this country. If we have a high voter turnout, if we can educate the public to the dangers we face, perhaps we can get our act together and go ahead. If we have 4, 8, 12 years more of what we've had in the past 2 or 3 years, it will be a very dismal period for the United States. Okay. What are the chances? Difficult for us to say right now. And that is why the present time is probably one of the most critical times in its prospect that America has faced for a long, long period. In these long periods before the Civil War, the Great Depression, 1960s, we had great leaders who were able to mobilize society. Can we produce such leaders today? It's a big question. Okay? The same is true of much of the rest of the world, particularly the Western world. Are we coming to a period when the Western domination of world affairs is coming to an end? Or can the Western world reinvigorate itself? These are questions that people in Europe are asking very seriously. Okay? So, this is a kind of big question period that we face in world affairs today. There is enormous opportunity for the United States to move ahead today. Okay? Have we the capacity to do that? Individually, we are a nation of great excellence. Can we be a nation of great excellence collectively? That is a big question. Okay? The Chinese seem to be the opposite. They are a strong nation collectively. Individually, they seek recourse in connections with others abroad and so on. Okay? The outcome of this is a very fateful situation. About a generation or two ago, there was a great thinker in Europe, a philosopher called George Santayana. Santayana said, people who are ignorant of their past are condemned to repeat it. Unless we reflect on the past and how we can get out of our present situation, we might be condemned to repeat it. And the fact is that there are short-term fixes and long-term fixes that we have to pay attention to both as we look to the next generation. That is the state of the world today, as I see it from the perspective of America looking out. Other countries have different views. Europe, too, has a very depressed view of the future. The Chinese have a very confident view of the future. Okay? Islamic states don't quite know what the future will be. Israel has had a magnificent history of 70 years. Can they continue that way? Well, many of them seem to think so. India has just begun to get itself together. Whether it can maintain that pace of development is another big issue. In the past generation, 1/3 of India has become world-class. Digital India, biotech India, some parts of industrial India. But 2/3 of India remains still old India. If they cannot move old India into modern India, there will be a huge clash between the two. So, in different parts of the world, this takes different forms. I am particularly concerned about this country because in its history, this country has done so much to contribute to the global condition. And we should not be in a state where our contribution to the global condition is negative rather than positive. That is why I quoted Santayana, who said that if we are not aware of our past, we'll be condemned to repeat it. Thank you. I deliberately left some time for questions because I know that many of you have issues that you want to raise. Yes, sir. The Chinese? Yeah, well, good. The people who run China, the 100 million Communist Party, is it based on talent or on hierarchy? The Chinese have a very peculiar system. 100 million people run China. That's the Communist Party, 8% of the population. They are largely self-selected, and the process begins from the start. You're a promising young student. You're enrolled in the youth league. You do well, you're moved into the junior membership of the Communist Party. You do badly, you're allowed to go elsewhere. Okay? Then you're given small responsibilities, you move up. Nobody reaches the top of Chinese politics without 30, 35 years experience in the system. Some people work in the system full-time. Some people, like union members, work in the system and also do their own job. And so they believe that a form of meritocracy takes this up. This is based on the old Chinese system of the mandarins. 2,000 years ago, the Chinese began a system which was the first civil service in the world by examination. It was the same time that Rome was declining. Rome, about 2,000 years ago, went from meritocracy to the families of Caesars, brothers, children, and so on. Rome declined. The Chinese were able to maintain their system by examination. After examination, you became a mandarin. If you were a mandarin, you went into government, to bureaucracy, and rose up the system. Others were down. So they have adopted some of it. But recently, some families have begun getting their relatives into the system. And that is what has affected some of the outcomes. The present leader seems to be trying to weed that out for everybody except his own family. Okay? That's why he's gone on an anti-corruption drive and all that kind of thing. Still, by and large, it is very difficult for anybody to come to the top of Chinese political and administrative system without long experience in the process. Okay? The leadership of China, today 8 men form what they call the Standing Committee of the Politburo, who run the country. The chairman is the leader of China. They select the next group and bring him up. The present leader arose like that. He comes from a family with some background in the system, but he was in the system for 20, 35 years. First as a youth leaguer, then in some states, then in some town, then rising up. And about 2007, 2008, they were planning the Olympics for 2008. It was in a big mess. Shanghai. He was leader of Shanghai. He was brought to straighten it out. He did a great job and produced a great Olympics. That promoted him up, and he was selected. So there is some element of that that takes place. Okay. Yes?
I have 3 children aged 22, 20, and 17.
Congratulations.
They are, by and large, much more pessimistic than I was at their age about the future and their role in it. They seem to be very occupied with race and gender issues, but less so with global issues. What would you say are the 3 most important things they should be thinking about as they approach adulthood?
Straightening out their society, employment, and having good relations with their parents. Yeah. You're rightly concerned about this. And what does it say? It says something else. Our education system is in need of a lot of renovation. Okay. Yes.
Most of the people in this room, as I have been shocked or certainly surprised at this new level.
At what?
At the outbreak of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Virulence.
Yeah.
We thought we lived in a place where that wasn't. Can you talk about that?
One of the most shocking things in the past decade or so has been the rise of anti-Semitism in the Western world. Not only talking about America, look at Europe. Okay? We thought this had been settled in the past. Okay? And this is the byproduct of that populism that I spoke of, which picks on certain groups and kind of selects them to be focused on. Okay? The sad thing is that leadership in many countries has done very little to correct this. We are good people on all sides, remember that statement? Okay? Okay? Some countries, and notably Germany, done things against. They punish people for Holocaust denial. Now that is under stress because of various groups in society. But the amazing thing is how anti-Semitism, not only in public, but also in universities and schools. Okay? And I think a huge amount has to be done to reach out and correct this. We have neglected a lot of education in this area. Okay? I'll draw your attention to China in this. Cultural education has taken a great hit in this country. Okay? Many countries promote their culture in various ways. You know, the French are very strong on this because they think French culture is something special. They have organizations all over the world called the Alliance Française. There's a big institute here where they teach French and so on. The Germans have something called Goethe House on Fifth Avenue. They teach all these things. The British have something called the British Council. You can borrow British books and have British events and all that kind of Spanish. We had something called the United States Information Service. We have cut it back greatly. Why? Trump doesn't believe in culture. Okay? So those are things we should be increasing. Okay? The Chinese didn't have anything like this because they thought they were superior. Why do you need to demonstrate your superiority? People will recognize you're superior. Well, people didn't. So they have opened 500 Confucian institutes around the world right now, on campuses in cities and so on, teaching Chinese and Chinese events and all that. Some of them are rather dangerous institutes. But anyway, we are cut back. This is a big mistake. We should be increasing that and increasing components like dealing with discrimination, anti-Semitism, and so on. I myself have been shocked by the degree of anti-Semitism which is infecting some of our higher educational institutions. Okay? So that is something. Sadly, the government of Israel has been so good in so many things, but somehow hasn't made public relations connections around the world. I think they're now beginning to reach out in that way. Okay? So yes, it's a matter for us to be concerned. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You consigned African countries, South American countries to the rest of the world club, whatever it is. Do you see anything occurring over the next few decades where they will become any kind of a catalyst to what's going on or something in their own?
Africa is in a very unhappy condition in this way. It is a cornucopia of resources, but the people of Africa are not benefiting from the resources. And right now, the Chinese are investing heavily in Africa. Some people say they are creating new colonies in Africa because they are building foreign aid roads and not getting out resources. And governmental condition in certain countries in Africa is not very good. Environmental condition makes it worse. However, one thing is improving in Africa, which is education is spreading. And also, mobile connectivity is spreading. Whether that will have a long-term impact, I don't know. But in my view, Africa is still some distance to go. Okay? And one of the problems is, of course, tribalism. It is creating civil wars in so many countries. That's the inheritance to some degree of European colonialism. Okay? So I think it will take some time for that to be corrected. In the meanwhile, the danger of Africa is that they will be exploited and their resources will be taken and their people won't benefit from those resources. Okay? Yes, sir. Hold on. Are you speaking? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Following up the last question on anti-Semitism,
I'm sorry?
Following up the last question on
Yeah, yeah.
what are the chances of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister of Britain? What would the effect of that be?
I don't know what the chances are, but he's not noted for being very pro. He's noted for being somewhat anti-Semitic, as you know. Okay, Britain has a leadership situation comparative to our own. You work that out. They've had 3 prime ministers in the past 3 years, each trying to deal with Brexit. And the standby alternative is this man called Jeremy Corbyn, who is the head of the Labour Party, who has been, through much of his career, noted for various alliances with anti-Israeli groups, anti-Semitic groups, and so on. It seems that he's now trying to change, but whether that's expedient or not, we don't know, okay? Is there a chance that he might be Prime Minister of Britain? There is a chance, because the other Prime Ministers have bungled things so much. Britain is heading for another election soon, okay? So it's a matter of great concern, okay? However, British polity is so involved with Brexit now that they have almost no time for anything else, okay? I would be rather unhappy if Corbyn, as you are, good prospect of Corbyn, okay? Yeah. Yes, sir.
So, what can we in the audience do to improve the outlook for the world? How can we have an impact on making the world a better place?
That's a very good question. And the first answer to that is go out and vote and get other people to vote. Second is that if we have low voter turnout, we will. Second is to participate in public debate wherever possible. Okay? Public noise is being made now by people who advance noise alone, not good sense. Okay? So get involved in that. But my first thing is make sure that you and other people vote. Because Mandela said once that if good people don't vote, they leave the feed open to bad people. Okay? Yes, sir.
You mentioned before about the education system has to be fixed. I think voting, first you have to fix the education system in order to get voting, but what are some of your ways that you think the education system?
I think we have a lot of problems with one thing. Government financing of education, big contribution, has been cut back. Okay? Government used to sponsor research, scholarships, and so on. That has been cut back. We have to increase that. We have to think of, I am a big believer, many people don't agree with me, I am a big believer in increasing foreign interaction with our education. We have cut back on that. Okay? I think that well-financed, moderate education is much of the answer to this, okay? How do we get it? We have to elect politicians who understand that education is important. It's another question, okay? And we have to increase informal public education, like we are having here around the country, okay? Those are not very comprehensive answers, but it's the best that I can think of at the present time. Okay? Yes?
How about over here?
Okay.
When Iran attacked the oil fields
Yeah.
in Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
why didn't Trump respond to it?
When Iran attacked the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, why didn't Trump respond? Because it wasn't an attack on the United States. It was an attack on Iran. It's in context of Sunni-Shia differences. Okay? Anybody who's going to respond, it should have been the Saudis. But they want us to respond. Okay? We should be very careful at getting into conflicts between different groups of Islam. Okay? Sometimes there's not much to choose between these. Okay? But the fact is that Iran, we're not very fond of, attacked Saudi Arabia, whom we are strangely fond of right now. I think this is best left to themselves to work out. It's not Iran attacking Saudi Arabia alone. All over the Middle East, they are involved with each other. Partly next door to Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, Saudis and Iranians are fighting a brutal conflict at the expense of the Yemeni people. In Libya, all over the place. This has to be sorted out by themselves. Okay. Fortunately, the global prospect for oil is much better for us now than it ever has been. Okay. So if they want to destroy themselves, we are still not dependent on Middle Eastern oil at the present time. Okay. I would be very careful in getting too close to any of those regimes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. And to follow yours further, if Trump responded, we would get into a big war with Iran. Do we want that? That's another thing. And not particularly pleasant people to deal with, but nonetheless, do we want to get into a war with them? You see, the Trump approach seems to be, you punish people, and then they will come and say, we are sorry, we like you. That's what we have done with North Korea. Then we want to have talks, but that has failed. That's what we are trying to do with China. Okay. That's what we have done with Iran. Okay. You punish them, and then if you inflict enough pain, then you can start talking with them. It's very different from the approach that 8 American presidents have taken since Nixon went to China with China. Okay. So that is basically. I think we can learn something from Israel in this. Israel has been rather careful in how it deals with these people. Sometimes it supports one, sometimes the other. Sometimes it doesn't support anyone. Its main concern is with protecting its borders, okay, not getting involved in the internal affairs of. Israel is now very concerned about the internal affairs of the Palestinians. Okay? And I will talk next time about how they are dealing with it. But I think that we should be extremely careful before we get into another Middle Eastern war with any Middle Eastern state. Okay. Yes? Do I think the President of the United States and President of China will ever get together? Yes, but I don't think anything will come out of it. The leader of North Korea and the leader of the United States got together. What came out of it? Nothing. Okay. We are now saying, after beating up on Iran, partly justified, partly not, but anyway, that we should be waiting for the Iranian leader to get together with the President of the United States. He said, I'm not interested unless you move the sanctions first. Okay. So I think they might get together, but I don't think anything much will come out of it. We are having some talks on the trade issue. 8 American presidents took the view from 1972 till Obama that a trade dispute with China will be no good for both sides. And that, yes, we are giving them some concessions, but it's worth it to keep them satisfied and growing. And if they grow, they will be not as violent as they used to be under Mao. But Trump takes a very different view on that. Okay? And Trump has an idea, it seems, that if he can get together with anybody, he can convince them to do anything. Well, he tried it with the leader of North Korea, and you know what has happened. Okay? He's now telling the leaders of Iran, you call me, I will talk to you. And they are saying, well, lift the sanctions first, and then we'll talk to you. Okay? And with China, he says, we are punishing you, and we'll talk at the same time, and then if you agree with us, come and talk to me. Okay? A little different from what we've been doing in the past. Don't we owe so much money to China? We owe a certain amount of money to China, and they are slowly selling that off quietly, not upsetting too much, okay, but they're not buying big new investments as they used to. The next big thing is that our government is now talking about removing the listing of Chinese companies on American stock exchanges, which will punish their, I don't know whether it will go through or not, but that's the latest development, okay? Yeah. Yes?
How secure is the peaceful transfer of power from the White House?
Is there what? Is there?
How secure is the peaceful transfer of power within the White House as it has been? Because someone has said that he wouldn't
How secure is the people transfer of power in the White House? People? Peaceful transfer of power in the White House. You mean Trump may refuse to go if he loses? That will be another situation that I don't think any American president will defy and occupy the White House if he loses. I don't think it's possible, because to do that you have to have the support of the bureaucracy, of the military and all that. I don't think that may be a threat, like there will be civil war if I'm defeated, but I don't think that will get. So far that's not been. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry?
I think about Tunisia.
Yeah.
The popular uprising to try to get freedom. And I think about so many others in the process, different countries, in an effort to try to get free. When I look into Hong Kong, what's happening today in Hong Kong, what do you see as the possibility for new democracies arising?
For what?
Democracies arising.
Okay. What is the long-term prospect for democracy? I am a little depressed about the long-term prospect of democracy in democratic nations. But in non-democratic nations, it is the vehicle for people to move. It takes a long time, but look at some of the countries in Eastern Europe. They convert them. Now, some of them are rolled back, like Hungary and Poland, but others, it has moved fairly well. Okay? When I was growing up, I never expected India to be a successful democracy, okay? Or Indonesia. Okay? Well, it has worked there. Will China have a future as a democracy? I don't know. I doubt it very much. And one of the doubts is this: is it possible to rule 1.5 billion people by democratic means? Elections, parties, and so on. But then somebody will tell me India is doing the same, is doing democratic means. So, depends on the culture, depends on the background. But certainly a democratic movement can open up a society a little more, okay? Can relax some of the tightness that's going on, okay? So, I am at the moment very concerned about the future of democracy in democratic nations. United States, Western Europe, okay? Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned populism earlier, and I'm wondering if you see this as a fad or as something that'll have a long-term.
Interesting question. Is what we see in the United States right now a one-time happening that will fade, or will it be part of our system for the future? That is the big question for 2020. Is Trump an aberration or the beginning of a new process? Okay. I don't know the answer to that. But it's a very important question, whether our politics has taken a wholly new turn or this is some odd freak that happens and will go back. Okay? If it is a wholly new turn, we are in for a very unhappy time.
So to bounce off that, sorry everyone else that has a question, but I think given we're on the subject, if we do end up with the Trump 2020 presidency, will this set a precedent worldwide that populism is?
Good question. If Trump is re-elected in 2020, how will it affect other parts of the world? Already, our government supports authoritarian states in other parts of the world which previous American governments would not have supported. Okay? For example, we haven't raised a word about human rights in China. We're talking about economics now, not a word about human rights. Okay? Not a word about human rights in Brazil, Philippines. Okay? So, America's retreat will have an impact on other parts of the world. Yeah. Yes, sir.
To follow up on the Iranian attack
Yeah.
question, don't you think America looked weak by not responding at all and emboldened Iran in the future?
Does America look weak by...
Be more destabilizing than any attack or response would have been?
Would America look weak because it doesn't respond to Iran, and that will have a long-term impact? I think restraint is better than launching an attack, because the attack will be endless. Look at what happened with Iran. Deterrence of what?
Of everything America is trying to get Iran to not do. It's just said, oh, okay, I guess it's okay if you do that.
Well,
Don't listen to our threats. Whatever you want, do whatever you want.
I think that, no, it's not do.
War by Pompeo. It was called an act of war.
That's what I say. It's act of war against us. Are we committed to an act of war against Saudi Arabia?
Don't we support our allies?
Yeah. Are we justified in being such close allies with Saudi Arabia? I don't think there's much of a difference in Saudi Arabia and Iran, if you ask me. Okay. So I think those things are better from a distance. And what I believe we should be doing is supporting groups in those countries that are trying to get rid of their leaders. That is, internal society, there are groups that we should be supporting. I think that the long-term prospect for the Iranian leadership is not very good because they're going on in this, alienating more people and so on. We have to encourage others to do that. Okay? Same with Saudi Arabia. Okay? I don't think that our jumping into one side in the Middle East is going to do too much good for us. Okay? Yeah. Yes. You might recall when talking about capitalism and all that, that about 45 minutes ago, I spoke about how the technological revolution is making a small group very rich and the rest of society is paying a price. That's exactly what we are focusing on. This is, in a way, at the heart of the next presidential campaign. Redistribution, okay? And that is not only here. It's happening in China. It's happening. Is it a byproduct of capitalism or is it a byproduct of globalized capitalism, the new form of capitalism, okay? Can it be corrected? Yes, I think it can be corrected, but it has to be corrected by political means, okay? If you have tax cuts that favor one group and disadvantage the other, then you're going to run into trouble eventually, okay? So yes, I agree with you, and I tried to focus on that earlier by talking about the hugely rich societies that have increasing groups of unhappy people who feel disadvantaged, okay? And I think I mentioned that what will happen to the losers? Will they begin to resent it, or will they passively say, well, that's the way I'm going to be, okay? So, yeah. I agree with your question, yeah. Yes, sir. Well, I don't know how realistic it is. And today, you know, millionaire is nothing. You must talk about billionaires. Okay? I think billionaires behave more like billionaires than they behave like Republicans and Democrats. Okay? So eventually, but I think there is a distinct difference because the pressure on the rich groups on one particular side are going to be greater than on the other side. Okay? And I don't think as much as you seem to imply. A very interesting development is taking place now. look at the amount of money that is going in small contributions to people like Sanders and Warren and others. Extraordinary, okay? These are small contributions. They're offsetting the big contributions, okay? So I don't think it would be, yes, billionaires behave more like billionaires than like Republicans and Democrats. On the other hand, I think there's enough push at the lower level to make the policies different, okay? Yeah. Yes? Too late. Go ahead.
I just wondered what you thought the chances of our Congress assuming the responsibility that they're supposed to have, having been elected, and not falling to political shenanigans.
It's a good question on which to end. My hopes are not as enthusiastic as they should be. And certainly, it coincides with the view of the American public, who look upon confidence in Congress at what, 12, 15%? Okay. Okay. Will another election make a difference? Every election we hope so. Let us see. Okay. Thank you very much. I must particularly thank you today for the good questions. I am very happy that we had a chance to engage like this. Thank you. See you next month.